Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into Victorian London. Not the polished world of parlours and parlourmaids, but the other London. The one that seeps under doors and curls around the corners of the polite world like smoke from a factory chimney. The lamps are being lit now, one by one, along fog, slick streets, and the drizzle makes each flame wobble inside its glass cage. You can almost hear the hiss of gas, the click of a lamplighter's pole, the distant cough of a horse. And somewhere in the darkness, a child is curling up under an archway, using yesterday's newspaper as a blanket. You probably wouldn't last half an hour out here. Your shoes would dissolve in the filth, and your phone battery would die before you even found a signal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in right now, drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of Holborn Viaduct, the air thick with soot and the sour tang of horse manure. Below you sprawls the underbelly of the 19th century, the tangled streets of Clerkenwell, St. Giles, and the Rookery of Seven Dials, places that respectable Londoners avoid after sundown. You look down and see a tangle of alleys no wider than a man's shoulders, walls that lean in like gossipers, and gutters that burble with what the city prefers not to mention. Somewhere in that labyrinth are the people called Crawlers. The nickname isn't metaphorical. They crawl. Some because they're too weak to stand, some because drink or disease has bent them double, and others because crawling is the only way to stay unseen. They huddle under carts, in doorways, in the lee of market stalls after the day's trade is done. A journalist from the Morning Chronicle once wrote that the crawler is the most pishable object London can show. But you suspect he never tried being one. A man with a patchy beard and mismatched shoes slinks past, dragging a sack that whispers against the stones. He's hunting for coal chips, scraps fallen from carts, to sell by the handful. Behind him, a woman coughs in the gutter, her hair matted with the same black dust. The city breathes through them, using their hunger to keep its own lungs clean. You move deeper into the maze. Each corner breathes a different story, the wet leather of a cobbler's shop, the vinegar tang from a pickle stall, the faint sweetness of cheap gin leaking from a cracked bottle. Somewhere nearby, a cat hisses at a rat that's nearly its size. The sound of your own steps turns soft, swallowed by layers of grime. A lantern glows in a nearby court, where two figures hunch over a scrap of bread. One offers the other a crust. The other offers nothing but thanks. That's the economy down here. Gratitude traded like currency. Historians still argue whether London's underclass was a dangerous mob or a network of survivors bound by necessity. But standing here, you can't help but feel the faint hum of cooperation, like ants rebuilding a nest after rain. The gaslight above you flickers again, and for a moment you catch the glimmer of puddles reflecting faces. Thin, hollow, moving fast. People here walk as if chased by their own shadows. You spot a mother carrying a bundle wrapped tight, whispering to it as though it's alive. It might be a child. It might just be hope pretending to be one. You turn a corner into Drury Lane. The theatre crowds are gone now, and only the faint echo of applause clings to the walls. A man in rags rummages through a discarded pile of costumes, pulling out a feathered hat. He places it on his head, grins at an imaginary audience, and bows to no one. You smile back. It's the kind of absurd dignity the city can't quite crush. In the distance, Big Ben tolls 10, though it's mostly for the rich who can afford clocks. The sound ripples down the alleys, marking bedtime for no one. For the people here, time is measured not by hours, but by hunger and cold. A sudden shout breaks the hum of drizzle. A policeman's voice, sharp and officious. You press yourself against the wall as two boys dart past, barefoot, their stolen loaf steaming in the rain. The constable gives up after a few steps. The streets are a labyrinth. He'll never know the way through. You hear him mutter something about crawlers and vermin, but his boots are already splashing away. You follow the boys until they vanish under a bridge, where the Thames glints dull and brown. There under the arch, you see them tear the bread in half. One laughs with his mouth full, the other just eats quietly, like a prayer. The river laps close by, oily and slow. Its surface catches glimmers of gaslight, twisting them into shapes that look almost alive. Somewhere out there floats the refuse of the entire city. Ashes, cabbage leaves, dead cats. You breathe in the smell of tide and tar, a reminder that London never truly sleeps, it just exhales. A horse-drawn omnibus rattles overhead, carrying theatregoers back to Bloomsbury, their laughter muffled by the clatter of hooves. Down here, you can't see them, but you can feel the vibration, the thin membrane separating comfort from desperation. One level up, velvet and sherry. Down here, mud and gin. Same city, different planets. You pass an old woman bent double, sweeping the edge of the street with a ragged broom. Her skirt is soaked up to the knees, her fingers swollen from the cold. She's one of the invisible workers who keep the gutters clear enough so carriages don't stick. When she sees you looking, she straightens, just slightly, as if to prove she still belongs to the world of the upright. "A penny for the night," she mutters, though you're not sure whether it's an offer or a wish. A cat brushes your leg, startled by a carriage clattering too close. You glance up in time to see its wheels splash filth across the brick walls. Everything smells of iron, rain, and fatigue. The night deepens. Somewhere, a distant whistle. The kind dockworkers use to signal shift changes. Echoes faintly through the fog. It feels like the city's heartbeat, mechanical and melancholy. You pause near a wall painted with faded advertisements, Decca, Collis Brown's chlorodyne, for all human ailments. You wonder if all includes hunger, loneliness, and the inability to feel clean. You cross toward a lodging house door, its sign reading 4p a night, straw provided. The smell inside is human in the rawest way, sweat, unwashed feet, despair warmed by breath. But there's a kind of peace here, two snores overlapping like waves, the shuffle of someone rearranging their coat to serve as a blanket. You step softly, past rows of bodies curled on the floor, faces turned toward the faint warmth of a dying stove. Outside again, the rain has stopped, replaced by a fine mist that blurs everything into watercolor. You notice how even misery can look poetic under the right light, if only from a distance. That's what most of the Victorian middle class preferred. Pity as performance, charity as tourism. Writers like Henry Mayhew took notes in these very streets, sketching lives that were otherwise invisible. His notebooks mention a woman he called the Crawler, who could no longer stand from exhaustion, but still begged by dragging herself along the pavement. He wrote that she had known better days. You wonder how many people knew better days, and whether that phrase is just another way of saying, "Who's to matter?" A faint melody threads through the fog. A street musician playing a tin whistle. The tune is clumsy but haunting. A man beside you mutters, "Best thing about London. Music even the rats can hum." You both laugh quietly. There's humor here, the kind that glows faintly like coal in a grate, refusing to die out. Midnight creeps close. The city shifts tone. You can feel it. Fewer wheels, more footsteps. Doors bolt, shutters close. The rich withdraw into silence, and the poor claim what's left of the night. A line of women gathers near Covent Garden Market, wrapped in shawls that once were curtains. Their laughter rings brittle but determined. They barter glances, gestures, the the thin thread of survival. You keep walking. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cries, a sound so fragile it almost dissolves into the mist. You follow it to an alley barely wide enough for your shoulders. At the far end, a young mother sits with the infant tucked beneath her shawl. She hums softly, her eyes closed. When she feels your gaze, she smiles and whispers, "He'll grow strong, you'll see." You nod. It's the kind of optimism London teaches only to those with nothing left to lose. The city seems to sigh with you. Water drips from a broken pipe, each drop steady as a clock tick. You lean against the cold wall, letting the damp seep through your coat, and listen. Somewhere above, laughter drifts from an open window. A piano plays a waltz you almost recognize. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you can pretend the music is meant for you. When you open them again, the fog has thickened, and shapes move ghost-like through it. Figures hunched and slow, dragging themselves toward the faint promise of morning. You realize you've been among the crawlers all along, part of the silent procession that London itself seems to dream. The gaslights flicker once more. Somewhere far off, a clock chimes one. The city breathes in, then out again, ready for whatever scavenged dawn awaits. You wake, if you can call it that, to the sound of rain drumming on tin and the faint squeak of a rat's feet against cobblestone. The night hasn't quite ended, but it's fading, thinning into that grey pre-dawn hour when London seems unsure whether to sleep or stir. You've spent the night with the crawlers. And now, as light begins to bleed into the alleys, you start to understand how they move through this world. Not as beggars or ghosts, but as the city's quiet scavengers. Your feet are soaked, and the soles of your boots feel soft from the constant damp. Somewhere nearby, a cart rattles as the first sweepers begin clearing refuse from yesterday's market. The crawlers are already awake. You can hear them shifting under their blankets of newspaper and burlap. An orchestra of coughs, rustles, and soft murmurs. They don't stretch or yawn. They just rise like steam. For them, waking means work. A man you met the night before, he called himself Ned, picks his way through the puddles, shaking the sleep from his hair. He's in his 30s, though the lines around his eyes could make him 50. You notice how he keeps his hands low, close to the ground, always scanning for dropped coins or fragments of coal. That's the crawler's instinct eyes, trained downward, searching for anything the world has carelessly let fall. They say the term crawler first appeared in newspapers in the 1840s, describing those so weak they had to crawl along the pavement to beg. But the word took on a broader meaning, spreading like soot, eventually coming to describe anyone who scavenged, scavengers of the gutters, the refuse heaps, the ash pits. Some were infirm, others just invisible. You watch as they crawl, literally and metaphorically, through the crevices of a city that barely admits they exist. The rain picks up again, steady and fine, coating everything in a grey sheen. Ned glances back at you. "Don't stand still too long," he mutters. "You'll get cold, and some'll think you're a corpse." You laugh, but you move. He's right. He leads you toward a market square where the remains of last night's trade still litter the ground. Stems of celery, bruised apples, fish bones, the wilted edges of cabbages. A woman with a child strapped to her back picks through the mess, pulling a cabbage leaf here, an onion there. You notice how deft her hands are, how quickly she judges what can still be eaten. The baby barely stirs. The woman hums a tune you don't recognize, something soft, almost cheerful. This is what London mornings look like for the crawlers, a scavenger's bollet. Hands dart and rummage, feet shuffle, eyes scan. Every scrap has potential. You see a man triumphantly pocket a lump of coal no bigger than his fist, grinning like he's found treasure. He has really. That bit of black rock might mean warmth tonight. The air smells of mud and oranges. Someone's thrown out a crate of rotting ones, and the scent cuts through the stink of horse dung and wet cloth. Somewhere nearby, a bell clangs as a fishmonger opens shop.
Shouting? Fresh haddock? This morning's catch!
His words feel cruelly ironic. Most of his customers will come from streets that never see fresh anything. You crouch beside a pile of ash dumped from a fireplace. Two children, barefoot, their clothes little more than thread, are picking through it with sticks. Cinder searchers, Ned whispers. They find pins, bones, bits o' metal. Sell them by the ounce. You ask how much that earns. Enough for a stale loaf if the day's lucky. Historians still argue whether Victorian poverty was a failure of compassion or the inevitable side effect of industrial progress. Some call it neglect, others call it necessity. Down here, labels don't matter. Survival does. You can almost taste the pragmatism in the air. Sharp, metallic, unsentimental. A thin dog pads past, tail low, ribs sharp enough to count. It sniffs a puddle, then trots toward the market refuse. One of the children tosses it a fish head. The dog wags once, grateful maybe, and disappears into the mist. You wonder if it knows any other life than this scavenging loop. Probably not. The sun creeps weakly through the fog, turning the city from silver to dull brown. The bricks seem to weep. Ned beckons you toward a row of arches near the Strand, where he says, "The proper crawlers." Sleep. You follow him under the bridge, your boots slipping on moss-slick stone. Inside it smells of smoke, urine, and something sweetly rotten. In the half-light, you see them, rows of people lying in heaps of straw, most wrapped in rags or sacks. Some stir as you pass, others don't. They're not dead, Ned says quickly. Just sleeping with their eyes open. That's what hunger does. You notice how quiet it is, despite the number of bodies. A baby whimpers once, then silence again. You crouch beside a woman who's humming softly to herself. Her face is worn, her hair stiff with grime. But her voice, it's light, almost elegant. She's singing a tune from the music halls. You realize, a hit from the Strand Theatre. Used to be a dresser. She murmurs when she notices you watching. Before the cough took my lungs. You nod. What can you possibly say? Victorian society loved to categorize people. The deserving poor, the undeserving, the vagrant, the criminal, the fallen woman. But standing here, all those labels feel obscene. You see only exhaustion and a flicker of something stubborn, something human that refuses to go out. Outside the archway, the morning has fully arrived. Carriages roll past. Gentlemen in top hats hurry toward offices. Their boots splashing through the same puddles that moments ago reflected the faces of the crawlers. None look down. You can't tell whether it's politeness or self-defense. Ned shrugs. They don't see us. We're part of the street. You notice he's right. The crawlers move with such practiced subtlety, they're almost invisible. They merge with shadows, stoop when someone of higher station passes, avoid eye contact, melt away into doorways. Invisibility is armor here. You stop beside a tavern door, where a servant tosses out a bucket of slop, bits of stew, grease, vegetable peelings. Within seconds, half a dozen hands dive in. No one fights. They just sort, select, move on. There's an eerie efficiency to it, like bees around honey. You feel your stomach twist, not from disgust, but from the sheer discipline of it all. A nearby preacher begins shouting about salvation. His voice echoes down the alley, a mix of passion and performance. "The Lord sees you," he cries. "Repent and be saved!" The crawlers mostly ignore him. One woman calls back, "Tell him to send bread." Then, the preacher glares, but keeps shouting. You can't tell whether he believes or just needs to feel powerful. There's humor here too, brittle and biting. A man balancing a sack of coal on his head calls out to another, "Oi, Bill. Tell the Queen I'll polish her crown next week." Bill grins, showing 2 missing teeth. "Tell her yourself." When she's down here, borrowing our soup! Laughter ripples through the group. Even Ned chuckles. Best thing about being at the bottom, he says. No one can kick you lower. The day grows busier. Barrows creak, hooves clatter, and the fog begins to lift. You see the city's layers all at once. Beggars below, shopkeepers in the middle, gentlemen above. London's like a cake made of soot and gold leaf, rich and rotten all at once. You pause near a bakery window, drawn by the smell of fresh bread. Inside, the baker's apprentice slaps dough onto a board. You can almost feel the warmth radiating through the glass. Outside, a girl about 10 stands on tiptoe to look in. Her reflection blurs with the loaves, and for a second, it seems as if she's inside, part of that golden light. Then a man shouts, and she scurries away. Ned stops to speak with a woman selling roasted chestnuts. She's one of the lucky ones. She owns her stall, small as it is. She hands him a handful of cracked ones that didn't sell yesterday. "Here, love," she says. "Eat before they go sour." Ned nods gratefully and hands you two. They're cold, but you eat them anyway. The taste is smoky and earthy, like the city itself. By noon, the crawlers start to disperse, heading toward different parts of London. The docks, the markets, the ash heaps. They move like a tide, each to their own corner of survival. Ned waves you off. "I'll see you by the bridge if you want supper," he says. "If the rain don't drown us first." You watch him go, his figure shrinking into the haze, until he's just another smudge on the city's canvas. Standing alone, you realize the crawlers are the city's pulse. Quiet, persistent, essential. They gather what London discards, and in doing so, keep it alive. Without them, the streets would choke under their own filth. Yet no one writes songs for them, no statues, no memorials. Only a few lines in dusty newspapers, and perhaps now, your own lingering memory. The smell of coal smoke thickens as evening creeps back in. Somewhere nearby, a clock chimes 3. You watch as another wave of crawlers emerges, ready to sift again through the city's cast-offs before darkness settles. The cycle repeats, endless, invisible, unrecorded. And as you walk away, you can't help but feel that London itself is crawling too forward through time, dragging its past behind it like a shadow. The rain stops sometime after midnight, though the sky doesn't clear. London's air still hangs heavy, soaked with the breath of a million chimneys. You follow the faint scent of the river, brackish, metallic, alive with rot. And soon the streets begin to slope downward, the cobblestones slick beneath your boots. The fog thickens until the world narrows to a few paces of glimmering lamplight. Somewhere ahead, gulls cry and cartwheels grind. You're heading toward the Thames, where the crawlers of the water live the mudlarks. You reach the embankment just as the tide begins to pull away from the shore. The river retreats like a slow, reluctant animal, exposing its ribs the slick, glistening mudflats that will be the mudlarks' hunting ground. A faint sulphur smell rises, half rot, half life. It's strange how something so foul can feel so magnetic. Down by the waterline, figures are already gathering. Boys, mostly. Some no more than 8 or 9, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, trousers tied at the knee. They carry sacks or baskets woven from reeds, and they wait, squatting like herons, until the river draws back just far enough to expose the treasures hidden in its filth. You pick your way closer, your feet sinking into the sticky mud. One boy looks up, eyes bright with suspicion and curiosity.
"You ain't a tosher,"
he says flatly. Too clean. You glance down at your mud-splattered coat and wonder what clean even means here. "I'm just watching," you tell him. He grins, revealing a gap where a front tooth should be. "Watch careful, then. She don't give up her treasures easy." He means the river. The first glint you see is a shard of glass, rounded smooth by time. The boy ignores it. He's looking for heavier things, metal rope, bones, coal, nails, anything that can be sold to the rag and bone men who wait up the bank. You watch him dig with his bare hands, plunging his fingers deep into the muck and coming up with a handful of black grit. He rinses it in the shallow tide, examines a fragment, and pockets it. "What's that?" you ask. "Copper," he says, eyes scanning the mud again. "Worth a halfpenny. Maybe more if the man don't cheat." You crouch beside him, and for a moment you see the river the way he does, not as water, but as economy. The Thames is London's digestive system, swallowing the city's waste, and sometimes spitting up profit. Buttons, coins, fragments of pottery, old nails, the occasional watch face, it all surfaces eventually. Historians still argue whether mudlarking was born out of necessity or ingenuity, whether these children were victims or entrepreneurs. Standing here, you suspect it's both. Necessity made them clever, hunger made them industrious. As the tide keeps falling, more scavengers emerge. Some are men with poles tipped in hooks, others are women with skirts tucked high, their ankles smeared in black. One drags a broken oar through the shallows, using it like a rake. The sound it makes is low and rhythmic, a wet scraping that blends with the city's heartbeat. The boy beside you laughs suddenly.
Found some at!
He holds up a lump of dark metal. When he rubs it clean on his sleeve, it shines dull yellow. Brass. He weighs it in his palm, satisfied. "That'll buy my dinner." You look at him, curious. "Where do you sell it?" "Rag shop on Wapping High Street," he says. Old man with a beard like a broom. He takes the lot. Pays in coppers. Cheats half of us blind, but that's business. A boatman calls from a nearby pier. "Oi, get off that slope before the tide turns."
You daft rats!
But no one moves. The risk is part of the rhythm. They'll stay until the water curls back around their feet, until the current threatens to drag them under. You look up at the city skyline. Warehouses, smokestacks, church spires, and realize that the Thames is its mirror. Everything that rises clean and bright above has its reflection down here, buried in the filth. You step aside as a woman passes, balancing a bucket on her head. Inside, you see bits of wood, a bent spoon, a cracked porcelain doll's face. She catches your glance. "People throw away funny things," she says. Her accent is rough, the kind the polite world likes to mock, but her voice carries a strange pride. "Once found a whole silver brooch. Sold it for a week's rent." You ask if she keeps anything for herself. She shakes her head. "No point. Pretty don't feed you." A whistle sounds from a nearby barge, a long moan that makes the air vibrate. The tide's beginning to turn. You see it first in the slow spreading ripples, then in the sudden urgency of the mudlark's movements. They know the river's moods like an old friend's. Within minutes, the first fingers of water start creeping back across the flats.
Time to scarper!
The boy calls, grabbing his sack. He darts up the bank, slipping once, leaving a trail of prints that the river eagerly swallows. You follow him to the embankment, where a few traders are already waiting. The rag and bone man with the broom beard is real, exactly as described. He sits behind a makeshift table covered in scales, weights, and piles of indistinguishable debris. One by one, the mudlarks approach, emptying their findings. The old man examines each piece, muttering calculations. Coins change hands, small but life-sustaining. Nearby, another trader sells tea from a tin kettle. The steam rises in fragrant curls. The boy uses one of his pennies to buy a cup. You watch him blow on it, his hands trembling slightly. "First warm thing I had since last Thursday," he says. You realize how thin he is, how his shirt clings to bones. And yet he smiles. You take a sip when he offers you some. It tastes of river water and burnt sugar. You don't mind. As the morning light strengthens, you begin to see what the mud hides. Bits of history embedded in the river's skin. Roman pottery, Tudor clay pipes, shards of Delftware. Every inch of London's past ends up here eventually. The river remembers everything. A historian once described the Thames as the city's unconscious. You can see why. It keeps all the discarded dreams, the lost coins, the forgotten jewelry, the letters that never reached their readers. Somewhere beneath the surface lies a map of lives. Millions of them, layered in silt. The boy finishes his tea and wipes his mouth. "When I'm older, I'll work the docks," he says. Proper job. Regular pay. He says it the way a child might say, "When I'm king." You nod and tell him maybe he will. A seagull swoops low, stealing a scrap of bread from another child's hand. The air fills with laughter and curses. Even here, humor bubbles up. Someone shouts, "That bird's richer than any of us!" And everyone chuckles. The smell of the tide sharpens as it climbs higher. The mudlarks retreat to the upper bank, laying out their finds in the weak sunlight. A few trinkets catch your eye. A rusted locket, a bent spoon engraved with initials, a porcelain button shaped like a flower. You wonder whose fingers once touched them, whose stories lie buried beneath the muck. "Funny, in it," says the woman with the bucket. City throws away its memories. We just fetch him back up again. You think of that for a long moment. By midday, the Thames is full again, swollen and secretive. The scavengers drift off toward their next task. Some to sell, others to sleep. You linger, watching the water reclaim its surface, smooth and deceptive. The river hides its scars well. You walk along the embankment, where a few boys are drying their finds by a small fire. The smoke curls blue in the damp air. One of them pulls out a bone whistle and starts playing a tune. Thin, shrill, oddly cheerful. The others join in clapping, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. You realize something simple and staggering. The crawlers of the streets and the mudlarks of the river are the same breed of survivor. One scavenges the city's skin, the other, its bloodstream. Both feed off its cast-offs, its mistakes, its blind indifference. A barge horn sounds again, low and melancholy. The boys wave mockingly, shouting jokes at the crew. You can't help but smile. As you turn to leave, you glance back at the river. It looks peaceful now, almost gentle. But you know better. The Thames has teeth. More than one mudlark has vanished beneath its surface, pulled down by sudden currents, or the weight of wet clothes. The city swallows its own without ceremony. Still, the mudlarks will return tomorrow, and the day after that, as long as the river keeps giving and taking. That's the deal London makes with its poorest. Survive, if you can, and we'll pretend not to notice how. The fog drifts back in, softening the outlines of everything. Bridges, barges, people. The water laps against the stones, whispering its secrets back into silence. You listen for a moment longer, then turn toward the city's labyrinth again. Up there, above the tide line, the next kind of scavenger waits. The toshers, men who don't stop at the riverbank, but dive into its underbelly, into the tunnels and drains, where the real treasures hide. You'll follow them soon enough. For now, though, you take one last deep breath of the river's cold breath, and let it fill your lungs like history itself. You follow them deeper now. These toshers, as Londoners call them, with your boots sinking into a sludge that doesn't want to let go. The air is damp, and every breath you take tastes like iron, rot, and long-forgotten soap. You hold a lantern low, and the oily water mirrors the flicker in trembling ribbons of orange. Above you, faint thunder rolls, but down here, it's always the same steady dripping, the muffled rush of unseen flow, and an occasional splash that definitely wasn't yours. The toshers are a breed apart. They belong to the world beneath the city, the labyrinth of drains, culverts, and sewers that knit Victorian London like a grim secret beneath respectable pavements. They move with practiced ease, their lamps slung low, long poles tapping the ground ahead for depth and danger. Around their waists hang little sacks for copper, rags, bits of metal, and sometimes things better left unidentified. You step carefully behind one man whose name, he tells you, is Alfie. His grin is missing 2 teeth, and his humor is darker than the Thames at midnight. He wades with you through the low tunnel, ceiling dripping on both your heads. He tells you that some nights, if you're lucky, you might find a dropped ring or a silver spoon washed down from one of the posh houses after Sunday dinner. Other nights, it's just dead rats and scraps of bone. Still, a tosher's fortune changes as quickly as the flow of the drains. You've got to keep your eyes open, Alfie mutters. The muck don't give second chances. And he's right. The work is illegal, technically trespassing, and the dangers are endless, noxious gases, sudden floods, collapsing tunnels. Yet, in this unholy maze, these men and women carve a strange kind of independence. Unlike the workhouse poor or factory slaves, the tosher is his own master, filthy but free. The authorities frown, of course, but they rarely come down here. Even the police know better than to chase a man into the underworld. You try not to imagine what's squishing underfoot as you step. The lantern catches a gleam in the muck, a bent button, a coin, a scrap of copper wire. Alfie plucks it out with pride, wipes it on his sleeve, and tucks it into his pouch. That's a halfpenny if you clean it proper, he says, winking. You laugh softly, though your stomach protests the smell. Above you, London is busy pretending this world doesn't exist. Ladies in bustled skirts step over grates without a glance, and gents in tall hats argue about morality and empire in their clubs. But down here, morality smells like mildew and survival. The toshers are part of what one Victorian reporter called the invisible nation. The countless poor whose labour and scavenging kept the city functioning. Historians still argue whether toshing began as a desperate craft or as a cunning adaptation. Some suggest it evolved naturally from river foraging when the Thames's edges became too crowded. Others point out that the city's early drainage systems practically invited scavengers, an economy of waste within waste. Whatever its origin, by the mid-19th century, whole families depended on it. Children learned to navigate tunnels before they learned their letters. You duck lower under an arch where the brick walls sweat and echo. The sound of rats squeaking in the dark reminds you that you're not alone. Alfie pauses, raising a finger. Listen, he says. You do. There's the faint rush of something larger approaching, the warning growl of backed-up water. In seconds, you're moving fast, scrambling toward a raised sideway, as the main channel fills with a sudden surge. The torrent bursts past like a living thing, carrying bits of trash, sticks, and a faint shimmer of something shiny. When the water calms, Alfie grins again. Told you, never trust the drains. They've got moods. You make a mental note never to test that theory. And yet, in this danger lies a strange beauty. The walls glisten, carved names and dates tracing the history of trespassers long gone. You notice one inscription, Tommy Finch, 1842. Maybe he made it out, maybe not. Every tosher knows someone who didn't. The gas lamps above ground may illuminate empire, progress, and civility, but here below, London shows its truest self, raw, perilous, and honest. Occasionally, you glimpse relics of the city's evolution. A broken ceramic pipe, a patch of Roman brickwork, an old horseshoe rusted to dust. These tunnels hold centuries of stories, layered like silt. You think of how archaeologists of the future might interpret what the toshers leave behind: a bent spoon, a button, a halfpenny pouch. Evidence, perhaps, not of squalor, but of ingenuity, the human instinct to make meaning, even in the gutter. One tosher tells you a tale of ghosts, spirits of those who drowned during sudden floods, said to drift along the tunnels, whispering in the current. You don't believe him, of course, but when your lantern flickers and a cold gust touches your neck, you're not entirely sure either. Superstition thrives where sunlight never reaches. There's also talk of the queen rat, a mythic creature half human, half rodent, ruling the Undercity with sharp teeth and sharper cunning. Historians still argue whether such tales reflected disease fears or simple folklore. But you suspect it's just how people cope, giving a name to the things they can't control. Still, you catch yourself glancing into dark holes, just in case. The air grows thicker the deeper you go. You can hear faint trickles converging, like whispers conspiring. Alfie leads the way toward a side drain that opens into a cavernous chamber where the walls are slick green and the ceiling arches high. The smell intensifies, but so does your fascination. This is Victorian London's gut, its hidden anatomy of pipes and passages that fed its industry and drained its sins. Above your head, thousands of people go about their lives, drinking tea, reading newspapers, tossing leftovers into sinks that lead here. You're standing in the aftermath of luxury. Every shiny dinner plate, every polished shoe, every cup of coffee leaves a trace that winds up in this subterranean tide. You can almost hear the city breathing through the drains. Inhale, exhale, over and over, century after century. Alfie finds another coin and pockets it. You notice his eyes light up with the same thrill gamblers must feel. Down here, fortune is a matter of inches. A bend in the tunnel, a glint in the grime. It's not wealth that drives them. It's the possibility. A tosher without hope would simply stop coming back. When you finally climb a ladder toward daylight, the first breath of fresh air feels violent. The world above is loud and bright, and smells like horses instead of methane. The toshers vanish quickly into alleys, avoiding constables who pretend not to see. They'll clean their fines, maybe sell them to a rag and bone man, and spend the evening in an alehouse recounting their luck. But you, standing there blinking at the pale London sky, feel like you've witnessed the city's secret circulatory system. The toshers don't just scavenge, they maintain balance. They're the unofficial cleaners of an empire, obsessed with appearances, erasing its filth in the most literal sense. It's strange comfort, really, to know that even in an age of grand manners and moral sermons, someone has to crawl through the muck. The Victorians may have built cathedrals and crystal palaces, but they also built labyrinths where men like Alfie stake their lives for scraps of copper. Progress, you realize, always leaves a shadow, and down there, the shadow walks on two legs, carrying a lantern and whistling into the dark. You emerge from the underground and find yourself back in the living city again, still grimy from the sewers, blinking against the pale morning mist. The streets stretch before you like veins of motions, carriages clattering, vendors shouting, and somewhere in the chaos, a small army of broom, wielding figures making their rounds. These are the crossing sweepers, and though their work looks humble, almost invisible, they are, in their own quiet way, masters of survival in a city that eats the careless alive. You watch one now, a thin boy in a threadbare coat, his bare feet wrapped in rags. His broom is nothing more than bundled twigs tied to a stick, but he wields it with the precision of a fencer. Whenever a carriage approaches, he darts forward, sweeping mud and manure aside to clear a clean path for the fine ladies and gentlemen crossing the street. If his timing is good, he earns a copper coin. If not, well, the horse doesn't stop just because he's small. He catches your eye, grins, and calls out, "Crossin', governor." The accent is thick, the tone cheerful but practiced. You nod, and he sweeps with exaggerated flourish, bowing as you step over the newly cleared patch. You flip him a coin, and he tips his grimy hat like a courtier. "Much obliged, sir. God bless ye." His words sound rehearsed, but the gratitude feels real. You glance around and realize there are sweepers on nearly every corner, some children, some older men, whose backs have bent from years of stooping. They're part of the city's choreography, moving with instinctive timing between wheels and boots. The Victorians were obsessed with order, and yet here is a kind of anarchy that works. Chaotic, self-regulated, and utterly human. Crossing sweeping was one of the lowest trades in London's vast economy of poverty, but it was also one of the most independent. No overseer, no factory clock, no landlord breathing down your neck. You owned your broom and your patch of mud. Of course, you also owned every risk that came with it. Broken bones, angry coachmen, and the eternal competition of too many sweepers for too few crossings. Historians still argue whether the crossing sweepers should be seen as beggars or workers. Some accounts treat them as industrious little entrepreneurs, symbols of pluck and perseverance in the face of hardship. Others insist they were simply beggars with brooms, tolerated because they kept the streets marginally cleaner. You suspect the truth, as always, lies somewhere muddy in between. A carriage rumbles past, splashing filthy water across the street, and your legs. You hear a laugh and turn to see an older sweeper, a woman with a shawl pulled tight and eyes that gleam with mischief. First time in the muck, love, she teases. You smile back, a little embarrassed. Her broom rests against her shoulder like a soldier's musket. Used to be finer mud, she says, glancing at the street. Now it's half ash and horse. She tells you how the sweepers used to station themselves near theatres or churches, places where respectable folk gathered. A good location meant steady coins, a bad one meant hunger. Sometimes, sweepers even fought over territory, their brooms clashing like swords. It's oddly noble, this invisible duel of survival. As she talks, you notice a gentleman stepping down from his carriage. His polished boots stop just short of a puddle, and before he can frown, the woman swoops in, clears the way, and receives a nod, and a coin dropped discreetly into her palm. She pockets it with professional grace. Quick hands or no supper, she says. That's London. It's strange to think that this little exchange, sweep, step, coin, was one of the few moments of contact between the Victorian poor and the well-to-do. For a second, their worlds touched, and then they spun apart again, both pretending the other didn't exist. Yet in that second, dignity was negotiated, bought and sold. You keep walking and see another sweeper. This one just a girl of perhaps 8. Her hair is matted, her face smudged, but her smile is luminous. She's chosen a spot by a baker's shop, where the warm smell of bread drifts through the morning air. She knows people here will be softer, more generous. Clever, she even hums a tune, something light, almost mocking the bustle around her. You catch yourself thinking how much marketing sense this tiny strategist has. Victorian social reformers often wrote about children like her. Henry Mayhew, the great chronicler of London's street life, described crossing sweepers in painful detail, their patched clothing, their earnings of a few pennies a day, and their resilience that somehow outshone their misery. He saw in them both tragedy and vitality. A people refusing to vanish. The quirky fact for tonight: some crossing sweepers, especially in wealthier districts, were so well liked by regular patrons that they became neighborhood fixtures. A few even dressed up their stations with little flags or polished boards, branding themselves like proto-entrepreneurs. One particularly famous sweeper in Mayfair was known to wear a tattered top hat and call himself Sir Joseph of Bond Street. You half expect him to start offering loyalty cards. You step closer to watch another pair of sweepers working in tandem, one clearing, the other collecting small scraps of refused nails, bits of cloth, even spent matches. Nothing went to waste. The refused trade was interconnected. Whatever the tosher missed below, the sweeper might find above. Together, they formed the city's circulatory clean-up crew, unpaid and unacknowledged. A constable strolls by, giving the sweepers a half smile. Technically, they're not breaking any laws. but they hover close to the edge of legality. Some accused of begging, others of loitering. Still, even the police know that London would choke in its own mud without them. Better the sweepers than the stink, the constable mutters under his breath as he passes. The morning brightens, and you notice something you hadn't before. The rhythm of the city is written in the movement of its sweepers. Each one claims a fragment of control in a world built to ignore them. They remind you that survival isn't just about food, shelter. It's about the human need to assert meaning, even with a broom made of twigs. Later in the day, you wander toward Covent Garden. There, the sweepers mingle with flower sellers, match girls, and costermongers shouting over heaps of vegetables. It's a living symphony of barter and noise. The sweepers here have better luck. The tourists and gentlemen like the charm of giving coins to the street urchins. You catch one old man wink at a child after handing him a penny. For luck, he says. The boy pockets it quickly, then sweeps the same spot again, milking the generosity. You can't help but laugh. As dusk creeps in, the mud thickens again, and the lamps light up like soft stars through the smog. The sweepers work by lamplight now, silhouettes against the glow. A woman hums a hymn. A child giggles as a dog chases his broom. Somewhere, a drunk curses as he slips and falls, and the nearest sweeper rushes to help him up. Half for kindness, half for the chance of a coin. The Victorians like to speak of deserving and undeserving, poor. But out here, those categories dissolve into the same muddy street. You realize that these people, dismissed as beggars, actually keep the city moving. They prevent chaos with every sweep, one puddle at a time. And maybe that's what London really is. Not an empire of marble and manners, but a choreography of ordinary hands trying to make space for others to pass. You think about Alfie in the tunnels, and now these sweepers above, both cleaning different parts of the same living machine. One scrapes the underworld, the other polishes its surface, both unseen, both indispensable. You find yourself pausing before leaving the street. The little boy who greeted you earlier spots you again and jogs over. "Fancy another crossing, governor?" he says with that practiced grin. You nod, and he sweeps a perfect arc of clean stone. This time, when you give him a coin, you add another for luck. He beams, then pockets both with a triumphant clap. "God bless ye twice, sir," he calls as you walk on. Maybe it's the cold, or maybe it's something else, but your throat tightens a bit. You look back once, watching him sweep with renewed energy as the fog rolls in, wrapping the streets like a grey curtain. London closes its eyes for the night. But the sweepers, like small stars, keep the glow alive at ground level. Morning stretches wider now, spilling light through the haze, and you drift into one of London's loudest hearts. The street markets. The smell hits first: roasting chestnuts, damp cabbage, stale beer, horse manure, and fresh oranges stacked high like tiny suns. Voices come next. A full orchestra of Cockney calls, laughter, bargaining, and gossip. You've stepped into the world of the costermongers, the street vendors who turned survival into a song. You follow a man with a tray of apples balanced on his hip,
Shouting, "Fine russets! Penny apiece? 2 for a kiss?"
A woman near him retorts,
"Make it 3 and you've got a customer."
and the crowd erupts in chuckles. It's chaotic, but the chaos has rhythm. Every market has its music. You can't quite tell if people are arguing or flirting, maybe both. Victorian costermongers were the pulse of London's working class economy, selling fruits, fish, bootlaces, ribbons, trinkets, or anything that could fit on a barrow. They were hawkers, humorists, and hustlers rolled into one. You weave through the crowd, your shoulder brushing a crate of onions, your ear catching snatches of rhyming slang that sounds half like poetry, half like code.
"Apples and pears,"
Shouts one man.
"Up the frog and toad,"
Replies another, grinning. You realize you've just overheard someone using Cockney rhyming slang. Apples and pears, meaning stairs. Frog and toad, meaning road. It's a linguistic badge of belonging, born from these very streets. Historians still argue whether it began as a playful code to confuse outsiders, or as a subtle defense against police and nosy employers. Either way, it became part of London's identity, music for the tongue, made by mouths too clever to stay quiet. A woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows leans over a basket of eels, the smell unmistakable.
She yells, "Fresh jellied!"
Two farthings a bowl, and you decide that perhaps you're not hungry after all. Still, the crowd buys eagerly. Eel stalls were London's fast food. Cheap, filling, and somehow comforting. A journalist once wrote that if you threw a stone in the East End, you'd hit either an eel seller or someone eating from one. You stop beside a fruit seller polishing apples on her apron. Her stall is small but immaculate, each item arranged with care. Ain't just food, she says proudly. It's presentation. She winks at you. The gentry got their galleries. We've got ours. You notice she's even chalked the prices in neat rows, a touch of dignity amid the grit. The costermonger's world ran on unwritten rules. Each trader had a pitch, his or her little patch of pavement, and crossing into another's space was as risky as trespassing on a noble's estate. But within their own borders, they were kings and queens of commerce. You see a small boy guarding a barrow of onions, while his mother haggles over potatoes. When someone reaches too close, he glares fiercely, broom in hand. Miniature monarchy in motion. There's a rhythm to how deals happen here, a joke, a shout, a test of patience. You watch an old man pick up a cabbage, inspect it like a jeweler, and sigh theatrically. "It's wilted," he says. "So's your face," replies the vendor without missing a beat, and the crowd laughs. He buys too. Humor oils the economy. The costermongers are more than sellers. They're storytellers, gossip hubs, and local newsmen. Want to know who's run off, who's married, who's in debt? Don't check the papers, ask the market. It's said the police sometimes came here not to enforce, but to listen, because the costers knew everything before anyone else. One quirky tidbit: many costermongers owned donkeys, pulling their barrows from street to street. The animals were often treated better than the owners themselves. Fed scraps of carrots and wrapped in blankets at night. Some costers even tied ribbons to their donkeys' ears for market day. A London cartoon once joked, "You can tell the master by the donkey's pride." You think it's not far off the truth. As you wander, the smells change again. Salted fish, damp wool, fried potatoes. Your boots stick to the ground with a mixture of sugar and grime. You stop at a stall selling second-hand boots, each pair mismatched but shined with care. The seller, a man with a voice like gravel, tells you, "One for the left, one for the right. What more could you want, eh?" He laughs at his own joke before you can. The costers have their own sense of honor. Many refuse charity, but value fairness. If a customer can't pay full price, they might offer a smaller portion, or a playful scold, but rarely outright rejection. Business is business. One says, but we're all breathing the same fog. Historians still debate how much the costermonger culture influenced British working class identity. Some argue it shaped a defiant independence, a tradition of self-employment and wit that echoed into the next century. Others see it as proof of the system's failure, people forced to invent economies just to stay alive. You can see both sides. The laughter here doesn't hide the exhaustion. It simply makes it bearable. You find yourself beside a vendor selling cheap prints, colourful etchings of queens, battles, and circus acts. "Entertainment for a penny," he cries. You flip through them, amused at the crude drawings of royalty and rogues alike. The man lowers his voice conspiratorially. "Got one of Jack the Ripper too," he says. You shake your head, half smiling, half horrified. Even horror sells, it seems. The market runs on until dusk, then changes flavor. Torches flicker to life, and songs replace shouting. You hear a fiddler playing something lively near the pie stall. A few traders clap along. A girl with a tray of violets hums as she sells her last flowers, her voice soft against the clatter. It's as though the market refuses to sleep. It simply dreams standing up. You lean on a post, watching the costermongers pack away their goods. One man wraps his remaining apples in old newspaper. Another counts his day's earnings. Barely enough, but his smile says it's a victory. The woman with the eels hums to herself as she scrubs her table clean. "Never mind the muck," she murmurs. Tomorrow's another market. Some of them sleep near their stalls to guard their wares. Others wheel their barrows home through the fog. Donkey hooves clicking softly on cobblestones. You notice a few share food or coins before parting ways. Tiny acts of community that rarely make it into history books. You realize that in a city obsessed with class, these markets are the great equalizers. Everyone haggles, everyone laughs, everyone breathes the same thick London air. Somewhere between the laughter and the bargains lies the city's truest economy. Not of wealth, but of wit and willpower. As the last torch burns low, the sound fades to a hum. You close your eyes, hearing only the ghost of voices and the rustle of tarpaulins being drawn tight for the night. London never stops trading, not even in sleep. It just changes its pitch. The morning fog clings low again, thicker this time, wrapping the rooftops in pale ribbons. You glance upward and notice faint movement. A boy's shape darting across a chimney ledge, broom in hand, like some suit-covered acrobat of the skyline. That's your cue to climb higher, to look above the city rather than below. Tonight, or rather this dim London dawn, you follow the chimney boys. The smallest workers of the industrial age, crawling through the lungs of the city itself. You crane your neck to see him. He's maybe 7, maybe 9. It's hard to tell beneath the suit. His limbs are wary, his face streaked black save for 2 shining eyes. He slips into a flue so narrow, you're sure even air would hesitate to pass through. You can hear his brush scraping, a dry whisper inside the wall. "Don't blink," says an older man beside you, the master sweep. "They're faster than smoke, these lads." His name's Mr. Biggs, though he's not particularly big. He wears a battered top hat and a coat smelling faintly of ash and ale. "Used to send me up when I were a lad," he adds, almost proudly. "Now I teach him not to get stuck." That's the thing about chimney sweeping in the early Victorian years. It wasn't machinery that did the work, but children. Small bodies could squeeze through flues no adult could manage. The boys, and occasionally girls, climbed from fireplace to rooftop with brushes or scrapers, often naked to keep from snagging in the narrow shafts. You feel your throat tighten as you imagine the dark, airless space closing in around them. The boy above coughs, a faint echo from inside the wall. "You all right, Tommy?" Biggs shouts. A muffled "Yes, sir," answers. Moments later, suit rains down like black snow. Biggs grins. "There's your breakfast, London." You can't help but admire the grim poetry of it. The same suit that fuels the city's fires. Factories, hearths, railways. Also coats the children who keep those fires breathing. Every chimney you pass in London's skyline, every wisp of smoke curling into the grey sky, owes its clarity to a child somewhere beneath it. Historians still argue whether the masters were cruel by nature or simply hardened by need. Some defended the practice, claiming it taught discipline and offered food to the destitute. Others condemned it as legalized abuse. Parliament eventually agreed with the latter, passing laws in 1840 and again in 1875 to end the use of climbing boys. But enforcement was slow, and suit hides many secrets. Mr. Biggs leads you to another house. The owner, a nervous man with gold cufflinks, watches as the sweep's apprentices get to work. "Mind the drawing room," he says. The missus hates ash on the carpet. His tone is more anxious about upholstery than children. Biggs nods, lights a pipe, and waits. "Can't clean society without getting a bit dirty first," he murmurs. You can't tell if he's joking. Inside, the smell of smoke and damp brick fills your lungs. You crouch by the hearth and peer upward. It's a black tunnel, faintly glimmering where soot has built up like tar. You hear the faint scuffle of knees and the rasp of a brush. Then, a sneeze, then silence. You freeze. Biggs frowns, then bangs the side of the flue with his pole.
Come on, lad! Nearly there!
A second later, a cloud of soot bursts forth, followed by coughing, laughter, and a small head emerging from the top of the chimney outside. Tommy waves triumphantly, his face a grin of pure blackness. Biggs chuckles. See? Alive and rich. He'll get an extra crust tonight. You try not to think about how many didn't make it. There are stories, half remembered, whispered by the older sweeps, of children who suffocated, trapped in bends or flues too narrow. The term stuck boy became shorthand for tragedy. Even now, Londoners shudder when they hear it. And yet, the chimney boys had their own sense of camaraderie, rough as it was. They sang songs as they worked, tunes you can still catch faintly echoing in old ballads. One went. Up I goes, the flute a scrape, black as night, but wide awake. Sooty skin and callosed knee, ain't no finer lad than me. You hum the tune softly as Tommy climbs down. Wiping his nose on his sleeve, he grins, holding up a small coin.
The missus tipped me,
he says proudly. You hand him your handkerchief, but he just laughs. No point, sir. It'll go black soon as I breathe. Outside, Biggs gathers his boys for another job. The air is thick with chimney smoke, and the rooftops stretch endless and grimly beautiful. People think we just clean, Biggs says. But really, we keep their fires from choking 'em. Every fine dinner they eat owes me thanks. He thumps his chest proudly. We're the city's lungs. We are. There's a strange truth in that. The Victorians built their empire on coal, on steam and soot, and every bit of it had to pass through someone's hands, someone's lungs. The Industrial Revolution may have been powered by engines, but it was carried on the backs of children like Tommy. You walk with them to their next stop, a bakery. The smell of bread fights bravely against the smell of smoke. The baker waves them in, grumbling good-naturedly. You sweep it proper, mind. Or I'll have ashes in my buns again. The boys giggle. You watch them disappear into the flue, little ghosts of industry, swallowed by the city's insatiable appetite. As you wait, Biggs tells you about the new mechanical brushes, the invention that threatens to make his trade obsolete. Rotary contraptions, he says with disdain. You can't beat a boy's touch. Machines don't feel the bends. Still, you sense he knows his era is ending. Technology has always had a way of pushing the human element aside, even the grim ones. The quirky fact tonight: one of the first people to campaign against child chimney sweeps was a man named Jonas Hanway, who also happened to introduce the umbrella to England. Imagine that. Fighting soot and rain at once. London owes him a medal for practicality. By afternoon, Tommy is half asleep on his feet. Biggs lets him ride on the cart beside the brushes. The horses plod through streets dusted with cinders, their hooves stirring the same ash the boys have just removed. You realize soot isn't just dirt. It's the residue of ambition. Every puff of it carries both pride and poison. Historians still argue whether these boys felt exploited or simply accepted their lot as normal. Diaries and letters are rare. Few learned to write. But in those who survived long enough to tell their stories, there's often a note of dark humor, something like pride in having beaten the city at its own game. As dusk deepens, You climb up with Biggs to a rooftop overlooking miles of chimneys, each one smoking gently against the orange sky. "See that?" he says. "That's London breathing. Long as she breathes, there'll be work for us." You can't decide if it's comforting or tragic. Tommy sits beside a chimney pot, swinging his legs, soot dust drifting off him like feathers. For a moment, the world seems almost still. You imagine the city's great engines, the fires in parlours, the smoke curling upward, all powered, all cleansed, by children who will never be remembered by name. A church bell tolls somewhere in the distance. Biggs lights his pipe, takes a drag, and exhales a perfect smoke ring. It floats upward, merges with the haze, and disappears. "Clean or dirty," he says softly. "We all turn to smoke one day." You nod, the chill wind tugging at your coat, and for the first time, you feel the strange intimacy of the city's breath. Each chimney exiling history, each spark a memory. Somewhere below, you know the costermongers are closing their stalls, and maybe Alfie the tosher is lighting his lantern. Everyone's part of the same engine, some deep in the muck, others high in the soot. The night settles, and you climb down, leaving the rooftops to their quiet, smoky sentinels. You know you'll never look at a chimney again without thinking of the small hands that made it breathe. You wake to the sound of clinking iron, a chorus of metal tapping stone in rhythmic unison. Down in the river's bend, under the arching ribs of Blackfriars Bridge, the mudlarks are already at work. Those scavengers of the Thames who hunt treasure in filth. The air smells faintly of brine and decay, a strange perfume of London's underbelly. You shuffle closer, boots sinking into the damp muck. And for a moment you're not sure if it's day or night. The fog makes time itself blur. A boy with a crooked grin looks up from the water's edge. "Mind your step, sir," she bites. He gestures to the Thames as if it's alive. And in a way it is. The river has moods. When the tide pulls back, it leaves behind the city's secrets, broken pottery, rusted nails, coins, bones. Anything lost in London ends up here eventually. You crouch beside him. His name's Jack, maybe 10 years old, bare feet caked in silt. He digs with a short iron hook, scraping through the mud. Every few seconds, he pauses to inspect some shiny thing. A button, a bent spoon, a tarnished brooch, and tucks it into a small sack. "Worth a ha'penny if I'm lucky," he mutters. "More if it's brass." Jack's mother calls from the shore, her skirt heavy with damp. "Keep your boots dry, love," she says, though he hasn't any boots at all. You smile faintly at the contradiction. That's the strange paradox of this world. People pretend they have what they don't, as if hope alone could conjure leather or warmth. The mudlarks aren't thieves, not exactly. They're scavengers by necessity. London's poor have always turned waste into livelihood. Bones to glue, rags to paper, metal to money. But the mudlarks have the dirtiest job of all, crawling through the Thames's muck for scraps others throw away. Some say they're like archaeologists of poverty, though no museum would display their finds. You step carefully, the mud sucking at your soles. Jack laughs at your hesitation. "Don't worry, sir. Only swallows you if you fight it." He shows you how to balance on the firmer patches, how to read the texture of the sludge. That bit there, too shiny. That's where the sewer meets the river. Stay clear, unless you fancy a dip in last week's dinner. You try not to imagine it, but the Thames is both artery and drain for the whole city. By the 1850s, it carried more sewage than water. Charles Dickens once called it a monster of corruption. And standing here, knee deep in its black embrace, you can see why. Yet it also glimmers strangely in the sunlight. Thick, oily rainbows stretching over the current like a painter's mistake. Jack's sister, Elsie, finds a coin. She squeals with delight and rinses it in the shallows. "Queen Victoria!" she declares, though the face is barely visible. Worth more if she smiles, they say. Jack rolls his eyes. She never smiles, silly. They laugh. A sound so bright it feels out of place in the grey murk. A scholarly fact slips quietly into your mind by the late 19th century. The Thames mud was so polluted that even bacteria struggled to survive in it. Yet mudlarks still waded through daily, their skin raw and their lungs filled with the damp stench of rot. Many fell ill. Fevers, sores, infections. But still they came back. Because in this city, poverty isn't a condition, it's an occupation. You watch as an older man pulls up a wooden crate from the shallows. He prays it open with his boot, revealing broken bottles and half-rotted fabric. Silk, he says reverently, feeling the thread between his fingers. Could fetch a shilling. He's missing 2 teeth and smells faintly of gin. But there's a strange dignity in the way he examines the fabric, like a jeweler assessing a gem. Historians still argue whether the mudlarks were heroes of survival or symbols of decay. Some call them the recyclers of the Victorian age, the earliest waste, workers who turned pollution into profit. Others say they embodied London's moral failure, a city so rich it threw away enough to sustain the poor. The truth, as always, probably sinks somewhere in between. Jack hands you a bit of pottery, blue and white china with a delicate floral pattern. From a shipwreck, he says confidently. You look closer. It's probably from a chamber pot. You decide not to correct him. Hope, even mistaken, has its uses. The quirky fact of this section: archaeologists in modern London still find mudlark relics, tiny shoes, thimbles, tokens, coins, and some of them date back to the Roman era. Imagine that the same mud holding 2,000 years of lost lives, all layered like pages in a book the river refuses to close. Elsie hums softly as she digs, a song you half recognize. Lolland's away, my John, she sings. The tune old as the tides. You join in quietly, your voice carried off by the damp wind. For a moment, the whole river seems to hum with her. The city fades. The carriages, the factory smoke, the shouting vendors. And it's just the 3 of you, deep in the heartbeat of history. Then a voice booms from the embankment.
Oi! Off my dock, you little thieves!
A dockworker waves a stick, scowling. Jack and Elsie grab their sacks and dart away, laughing breathlessly. You follow, slipping and nearly falling in the sludge. They know every path, every hidden plank that leads back to the safety of the stairs. When you finally reach the street, the transition is jarring. The stink of the river replaced by the sharp scent of horse manure and coal smoke. Jack dumps his haul onto a piece of cloth. A handful of nails, a brass ring, 2 buttons, and the coin. Not bad for a morning, he says. Mum will get tea from this. Maybe even bacon. He sounds proud. You realize that, in their own small way, the mudlarks have mastered the economy of despair, turning refuse into survival, filth into sustenance. You buy them each a meat pie from a street stall. Jack bites into his and lets out a satisfied groan. You rich folks don't know what you're missing, he says through a mouthful. You smile, thinking he's not entirely wrong. There's a raw honesty and hunger. Every bite is a victory. The Thames murmurs behind you, timeless and indifferent. The river doesn't judge, it only records. You think of how many lives it swallowed. Criminals tossed from bridges, babies from workhouse doors, sailors gone astray. Yet every tide brings something back: a nail, a coin, a memory. London never loses anything completely. It just buries it under another layer of mud. Night comes slow and smoky. The lamps along the bridge flicker to life, reflections shivering on the water. The mudlarks are long gone, their finds tucked safely away. You linger a bit longer, listening to the faint lap of the tide. Somewhere below, something metallic gleams faintly. A lost ring, maybe, or a token from a long-forgotten pub. You imagine it whispering, "I was loved once." Historians still debate whether mudlarking was ever truly abolished, or simply faded with modern sanitation. The Great Stink of 1858, when the Thames became so foul Parliament fled Westminster, forced London to build sewers and embankments. The river was tamed, but in taming it, the city also erased a way of life. You step away at last, wiping mud from your boots. A street musician nearby plays a mournful tune on a fiddle, the sound mingling with the distant rush of water. "You'll come back," he says without looking up. Everyone does. The river keeps your shadow. You don't argue, because he's right. Once you've stood in the Thames mud and felt the heartbeat beneath it, you can't unhear it. It's the sound of London's underworld breathing. Slow, steady, eternal. As you walk away, you glance over your shoulder. The tide is rising, the mud disappearing beneath a silver glaze of water. In a few hours, it will all look clean again, as if nothing ever happened. But you know better. The city's memory is buried, not erased. And tomorrow, when the river pulls back, the mudlarks will return, barefoot laughing, scraping treasure from the bones of empire. Morning again, but not the pale, misty kind from the docks. This dawn feels yellowed and feverish, the air heavy with the smell of hot iron and wet hay. You're standing in Spitalfields Market, the beating heart of London's working class bustle, and the crowd moves like a living thing. Here, the world doesn't crawl in darkness like the toshas or mudlarks. It swirls in colour and noise. You step between barrows piled high with vegetables, onions dangling like tiny suns, carrots bright as coins. The market hums with 1,000 conversations, a rhythm of bartering, joking, shouting. You almost have to shout to hear yourself think. A woman with a shawl wrapped tight around her head sells cabbages the size of cannonballs.
"A penny for one, 3 for a penny?"
she cries, her voice slicing through the clamour like a trumpet. You've wandered into the domain of the costermongers, the street vendors who keep Victorian London fed. Their carts line every street, an alley, their cries echoing from sunrise to sunset.
"Eels alive! Hot eels!"
shouts one man, waving a bucket. "Lovely apples. Sweet as your sweetheart's lips," calls another. You can't tell if he's talking to customers or the universe itself. The smell of frying onions mingles with that of horse manure, damp canvas, and tobacco smoke. It's chaos, but somehow it's life. Costermongers are more than sellers. They're entertainers, performers of survival. Their voices become the city's soundtrack, their slang a dialect of defiance. You hear it everywhere. Cockney rhymes, quick wit, and laughter sharp as tin. A man named Alf, broad-shouldered, sleeves rolled up, calls you over. "You look like you ain't eaten since the Great Plague," he jokes. He hands you a slice of something sizzling from a pan. "Try that. Pig's fry. Cheap, cheerful, and maybe a bit fatal." You take a cautious bite. It's smoky, salty, and alarmingly good. Alf grins. "Told ya. We feed kings, we do. They just don't know it." His cart is an odd masterpiece. Part kitchen, part stage. Painted letters read ALFNIZZIE, Beast Banjasi Spitelfields. Lizzie herself stands beside him, hair tied up in a kerchief, flipping sausages with casual authority. She catches your glance. "Don't stare, love," she says. He's married, to the cart. Everywhere you turn, there's movement. Women haul baskets of apples, men shout prices, children chase stray dogs. The cobblestones gleam with spilled cider and rainwater. A busker plays a tune on a concertina, and for a moment, even the horses seem to sway in rhythm. A mainstream, historical fact drifts in through the noise. By the mid-1800s, there were over 30 Zarras and costermongers in London. They were the arteries of food distribution, keeping the poor alive when shops were too dear. Many worked from dawn until midnight, sleeping in their carts to guard their stock. The market wasn't just livelihood. It was family, community, rebellion. Alf waves to another vendor, an old man selling flowers.
"Morning, Ned!"
Still peddling your weeds. Better weeds than your mystery meat, Ned shoots back. The crowd laughs. You notice how insults here are affectionate, almost musical. Historians still argue whether costermongers were the backbone of London's working class or a nuisance to polite society. You think aloud. Alf snorts. Both, mate. Backbone by day, nuisance by night. The quirky fact of the day, the word costermonger comes from costard, an old term for apple. So originally, they were just apple sellers. But London has a way of expanding definitions until they burst. As you wander deeper into the maze,
A young boy shouts, "Fresh strawberries! Just picked from Kent, swear on me, mum."
you look at the fruit, small, slightly squashed. You decide to believe him anyway. He grins, pocketing your coin. God bless you, sir. Don't tell the peelers I sold on the quiet. You realize something quietly profound as you walk markets like this are the pulse of the city's lungs. Here, the poor aren't invisible. They're noisy visible, essential. Every shout is a declaration that they exist, and they won't be ignored. You spot a preacher standing on a crate, waving a pamphlet.
"Repent, you sinners! The wages of gin are death!"
He cries. Alf shouts back. Ain't had a raise in years then.
"Preacher!"
The crowd howls with laughter. Humor is their armor, their weapon against respectability. A Costa girl named Nell approaches, her hands full of violets. "Flower for your sweetheart?" she asks slyly. You hesitate. "Don't have one." She winks. "Then buy two. Maybe you'll get lucky." Her grin fades slightly as she looks toward the constable at the corner. Best keep walking, though they've been clearing us again. The tension prickles at the edge of the laughter. You can feel it. Authority and survival locked in an endless tug of war. The police call the Costas disorderly. The Costas call the police decorative. It's a rivalry older than cobblestones. Suddenly, a whistle cuts the air. Two constables push through the crowd. No blocking the street. One shouts. The vendors scatter like birds. Alf curses, shoving his cart toward the curb. "Every bleeding week," he mutters. Lizzie throws a cloth over the sausages and grins. "Smile, love. They only chase you if you look guilty. You help them move the cart." The constable stops, eyes narrowing. "License." Alf shrugs. "Lost it in the fire?" "What fire?" "The one I just invented." Lizzie smirks. Even the officer cracks a reluctant smile. "You two are trouble," he says, walking off. When the market comes again, Alf wipes his brow. "See, mate, this city, she don't love you, but she'll dance with you if you keep up." You nod, realizing that in the great machinery of London, these street sellers are the grease that keeps it turning. The noise swells again. Calls, laughter, footsteps. And for a heartbeat, you forget the grime. You just listen. It's beautiful in its chaos, like an orchestra of survival. A moment later, rain begins to fall. Fine. Silvery drizzle that turns everything reflective. The market lights shimmer on puddles. Alf and Lizzie throw a tarp over the cart and huddle beneath it. Still selling, still smiling. "Weather can't stop hunger," Lizzie says. "Or rent." You buy another sausage just to stay near the warmth. Steam curls upward, mixing with the drizzle, blurring faces into watercolor shapes. You catch glimpses. A mother nursing her child in the shelter of a barrow. A man counting pennies with cracked fingers. A girl humming while tying violets with string. Ordinary miracles. Later, as the market closes, Alf raises a mug of tea. "To London," he says. "May she never sleep too long." Lizzie clinks her mug against his. "And may she never run out of sausages." They laugh, their silhouettes framed by lantern glow. You walk away slowly, past empty crates and fading laughter. The smell of fried onions lingers like a memory. Behind you, the last vendors pack up, their wheels creaking over wet stone. Tomorrow they'll return, just as loud, just as alive. Because London doesn't stop. It only pauses long enough to dream. As you turn the corner, a ragged man sings softly to himself. In Spitalfields I sell me wares, by candlelight and dirty stairs. A penny earned, a supper won, the city sleeps, my work ain't done. His voice trails off into the rain, and you can't tell if he's sad or simply tired. Maybe both. And you feel strangely at peace. The noise of the market fades behind you, replaced by the slow rhythm of hooves on wet stone. Somewhere nearby, a chimney still smokes, a sewer still flows, and the heart of London keeps beating. Steady, stubborn, alive. The city wakes slower this morning, or maybe you do. The fog drifts lower, smudging out the skyline, and the smell in the air isn't quite smoke or damp. It's iron. You follow the scent through narrow lanes, until you hear the hammering, the ringing, rhythmic song of London's blacksmiths and tinkers. You find them under a railway arch near Clerkenwell, sparks bursting like tiny stars each time the hammer meets the anvil. A man with arms like tree roots raises his head, eyes catching the glow. "Mind the fire, friend," he says, voice thick with soot. "She's temperamental today." You step closer, feeling the heat lick at your face. The smith, his name's Gideon, wears a leather apron darkened with years of sweat and smoke. His forge glows orange, reflecting off puddles like molten glass. Every clang of his hammer echoes off the walls, reverberating through your ribs. The whole city, you realize, seems to hum in tune with him, making horseshoes. You ask. He grins, showing teeth white against the grime. "Not just shoes. I make legs for the city herself." He holds up a glowing iron rod. Bolts, hinges, rails. You name it, London stands on this. You watch as he plunges the rod into a trough of water. Steam hisses like an angry ghost, and Gideon laughs. She complains, but she cools quick. He tosses the finished piece aside, where it lands among a pile of iron that looks like skeletons of forgotten machines. Beside him, a young woman works a smaller forge, her sleeves rolled high, face streaked with sweat and soot. "That's Clara," Gideon says proudly. "My niece. Stronger than half the lads in Smithfield." Clara rolls her eyes without pausing her hammering. "And smarter," she adds. You watch her work. The rhythm, the confidence, the way she moves like the hammer is part of her heartbeat. Sparks fly, catching in her hair like embers in the dark. "You're staring," she says, not looking up. "You'll go blind if you don't blink." You blink, laughing, and she grins. "Told you." The clang of metal fills the space, almost hypnotic. You realize this forge is more than a workplace. It's a heartbeat chamber. The industrial age might have been born in factories, but it was raised by hands like these, shaping the invisible skeleton of civilization one blow at a time. A mainstream historical fact flickers in your mind by the mid-19th century. London's forges and foundries supplied everything from carriage axles to ship anchors. The great bridges, the Thames crossings, the rail viaducts, even the iron ribs of the Crystal Palace, all came from men like Gideon. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution was progress or punishment. You say aloud, half to yourself. Gideon chuckles. "Ain't that the truth? Depends which end of the hammer you're on." The quirky tidbit tonight. Many Victorian blacksmiths believed that iron had moods, that a bar could sulk or sing, depending on how it was struck. Gideon swears by it. "You've got to feel her," he says, tapping the metal gently. "Too hard," she cracks. "Too soft," she mocks you. Like a wife, God bless her. Clara smirks. "You're not married, uncle." "Exactly," he replies. "That's why I can joke." Outside the arch, you hear the shrill cry of a train whistle. The rails vibrate faintly underfoot. Clara looks toward the sound. "That's my favorite thing," she says quietly. "Knowing something I made might ride under that engine." She pauses, wipes her brow. "People look at trains and see power. I see our fingerprints." You think about that as you watch the molten metal shift colors, from orange to red to dull grey. Every inch of London depends on this hidden heat. The factories, the railways, the ships, they're all descendants of the anvil. And the smiths, in their smoky caverns, are the city's forgotten alchemists, turning fire and sweat into progress. Gideon offers you a tin mug of tea, dark and metallic tasting. Don't mind the flavour, he says. Bit of soot adds grit. You sip carefully, trying not to cough. Clara laughs. He serves that to customers to test their courage. A boy bursts in, panting.
Mr. Gideon!
The bridge needs bolts again.
The inspector's waiting!
Gideon sighs, wiping his hands on his apron. That bridge eats more iron than a sailor eats biscuits. He turns to you. Come on then, if you're curious. You'll see where our sweat goes. You follow them through narrow streets, until the arch of Blackfriars Bridge looms ahead again, its red iron ribs stretching across the river, like a steel leviathan. Workers swarm beneath it, tightening bolts, swinging hammers. Gideon inspects their work, muttering approval or scolding with equal gusto. This bridge, he says, patting a column, she's like a stubborn mule, always shifting, never still. He knocks on the iron and listens. Hear that ring? That's a good sound. Means she's holding strong. Clara kneels, hammering a rivet into place. Her strikes are quick, precise, confident. The sound echoes across the water. Clang, clang, hiss, until even the gulls pause mid-flight. You realize that this noise, harsh as it is, might be the most hopeful sound of the century. It's the music of humans trying to hold the world together. Ever wish for quieter work? You ask. Clara wipes her brow and smiles faintly. Quiet's for people who can afford it. You stand with them as the sun sets over the Thames, turning the bridge gold. Gideon lights his pipe, the flame flickering against the iron beams. We'll never be remembered, he says softly. People will look at the bridge and say, "Isn't it grand?" But they'll never ask who held the hammer. You want to tell him that you will remember, but maybe it's enough that the bridge remembers. Each strike, each burn, each blister is part of its spine. A bell tolls from the city beyond. Gideon glances up. Time to rest. Tomorrow, we build again. He packs away his tools, patting the anvil affectionately. Good girl, he murmurs. You earned your keep. You walk with them back toward the forge. The air has cooled, and the street lamps glow faintly through the fog. Clara hums as she walks, a tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby, though her voice is rough from smoke. As you part ways, Gideon claps your shoulder. Remember, friend. Fire's only dangerous if you forget who's holding the hammer. You nod, feeling the warmth of the forge still in your bones. The clang of their work fades behind you, replaced by the low hum of the city. Everywhere, unseen fires glow. Blacksmiths, cooks, factory furnaces, all shaping London in their image. For a fleeting moment, you imagine the city as one great machine, forges as its heart, chimneys as its lungs, the Thames as its bloodstream. And somewhere deep inside it, the hammer still rings, steady as a heartbeat. The wind picks up, carrying the faint metallic tang of the forge. You breathe it in. It tastes like history. Night creeps across London like ink poured into water. The river glimmers faintly, catching reflections of gas lamps and half-shuttered windows. The city seems quieter now, but beneath that hush, a low pulse continues. The soft churning of gears, the whisper of steam, the shuffle of boots on cobblestone. You walk along Fleet Street, where the smell of ink replaces the tang of coal. The presses are running late into the night, their heavy wheels turning with relentless rhythm. Each thud is a word being born, each hiss of steam another thought pressed into permanence. You pause at an open doorway, drawn by the sound, a clatter of metal type, a murmur of conversation, the faint sweetness of fresh paper. Inside, A printing press dominates the room like some enormous iron beast, its flywheel spinning slow and sure. A man in rolled sleeves and ink, stained fingers shouts over the clamour.
Mind your spacing, lad!
We print truth here, not soup recipes. He's the master printer, clearly, his grey hair sticking up in all directions, a smear of ink on his cheek like war paint. Come in then, he calls when he notices you. No point gawking. She's a beauty, isn't she? You step inside, and he pats the press affectionately. This here's the Albion. She's been running 20 years, and I'll wager she's printed more scandals than the Devil's Diary. He laughs, a deep, rich sound. Name's Mr. Aldwych. Ink runs in the blood. My father printed pamphlets, when the censors would hang a man for the wrong headline. He nods toward the walls, where old broadsheets curl like dried leaves. Votes for women. Reform now. London's Great Fire remembered. At a side table, a young apprentice arranges tiny lead letters into a frame. You watch as he spells out THETMSOF Londo, SPKL His fingers move with the delicate precision of a jeweler. Each letter, a universe in miniature. Aldwych grins when he sees your fascination. Every word you've ever read, every law, every sermon, every poem. Someone once set by hand, one letter at a time. No magic, no electricity. Just ink, lead, and stubborn patience. You lean closer, the smell of oil and metal strong. He continues, people call us printers. I say we're the city's memory keepers. Paper forgets faster than people, but it also forgives faster. Outside, a clock strikes midnight. The apprentices keep working, unbothered by the hour. You realize how vital this press is. How the industrial age didn't just build bridges and locomotives, but also built ideas multiplied and flung across nations. You ask, what are you printing tonight? Aldwych smiles slyly. A new editorial. About factory conditions in Whitechapel. The owners won't like it. But truth's no use unless it rattles someone's bones. He gestures to a young woman sitting at a desk, pen flying across paper. That's my daughter, Eliza. Writes better than half the city's menfolk. Don't tell the editors. Eliza glances up briefly, eyes sharp. We're running a piece on the match girls' strike, she says. You know about them? You shake your head. They work in the match factories. Phosphorus eats their jaws, one by one. They call it pussy jaw. The bosses don't care. Cheap labor, easy profit. Her jaw tightens. But they walked out last month. Whole streets of girls marching for their lives. Brave, filthy, hungry, and magnificent. Aldwych chuckles. That's her, my firebrand. I just print the words. She sets them ablaze. You move closer to the press as Eliza finishes, writing and hands over her copy. The apprentices lock the page into place, and the great lever descends with a hiss. Paper slides out, wet with fresh ink, carrying her words into the world. You read the Garels duecho star UCKC may TCH. Beneath it, her words burn quietly. They are not angels, nor saints, but something better. Women who learned that even the smallest flame can burn down injustice. Aldwych watches your expression and nods. We'll run 200 before dawn. Maybe 1,000 if the police don't find us first. That's the quirky historical tidbit here. Many of London's early printers were clandestine revolutionaries. Pamphlets, newspapers, and broadsheets often had to be smuggled through the city in barrels marked soap or flour. Printing presses were seized. Editors jailed, apprentices beaten, but the words never truly stopped. Aldwych hands you a sheet, still damp. Keep it, he says. You'll find the truth dries slower than ink. As you fold the paper, the room shudders slightly. The presses have stopped. Eliza glances at the ceiling. You feel that? She whispers. Just the underground, Aldwych mutters. The new train lines, they shake the foundations, but they'll settle. He looks at you with a grin. That's London for you. Everything shakes a bit before it stands firm. You stay as they resume printing, the air thick with steam, and the rhythm of progress. Each pull of the lever sends another voice into the night. You think of the smiths from the last section, their forges roaring with fire. Here, the forges are of thought and paper. Outside, dawn is only a suggestion on the horizon. The fog glows faintly, reflecting gaslight like ghost fire. Eliza stands in the doorway, watching as boys run off with stacks of fresh papers. They'll be read in pubs by noon, she murmurs. By nightfall, maybe a girl in the East End will read it too, and realize she's not alone. You ask, and that's enough? She smiles softly. It's always enough to be heard. You walk away down Fleet Street, clutching the still, warm paper. The ink stains your fingers, a black reminder of a world built not just on steel and sweat, but on words. As you glance back, the press still clanks, steady as a heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the roofs, the city begins to stir again. Horses clop, chimneys smoke, the smell of bread returns to the air. London is waking, and beneath it all, invisible yet eternal, the press keeps whispering, printing stories, arguments, revolutions. You remember Aldwich's words, paper forgets faster than people, but it forgives faster too. You wonder which one history will choose. The fog thickens again, and you disappear into it. Another reader, another witness. The last sound behind you is the rhythmic hiss of the press, like the city breathing in ink. You step out from the printer's lane, and into the slow heartbeat of early morning, but the night hasn't fully let go. London is between breaths, the stars still faintly visible above the rooftops. The first wagons of produce trundling toward the markets, their wheels clattering like coins spilled over cobblestone. The air is wet, thick with fog, and you can taste both the river and the smoke of countless chimneys rising to greet dawn. You walk towards Spitalfields, where a different kind of industry is already alive. Here, night markets flicker into being, while respectable London still sleeps. Makeshift stalls lean against one another like drunken sailors, their tables piled with goods, bruised apples, stale bread, worn boots, a handful of ribbons still clinging to colour. You hear voices, soft, urgent, bargaining through the haze. A woman calls out to you from behind a pile of vegetables that seem more leaf than root. You after onions, love, or a miracle cheaper. She laughs before you can answer, showing teeth that have seen better decades. Miracles go fast, mind you. Try the next stall. You smile and pass on, boots sticky with spilled beer and cabbage water. The market is alive with smell. Coal smoke, damp wool, roasted chestnuts, and the faint sweetness of decay. There's rhythm here, a steady hum of survival, coins clinking, hawkers shouting, babies crying somewhere deep in the fog. The men and women here are costermongers, working the night shift of humanity. Their carts are patched with rope and prayer, their cries echoing down alleys like hymns of hunger. One sells oranges from a broken wheelbarrow. Another offers meat pies that steam suspiciously. You watch a man taste one, grimace, and still finish it. Hunger edits taste. From somewhere behind you, a laugh cuts through the noise. A ragged, musical laugh that belongs to someone who's seen too much to care. You turn and see a flower girl, her skirt muddy to the knees, holding a basket of drooping violets. "Buy a posy for luck, sir," she chirps, then adds, with a sideways grin. Or maybe to hide the smell of London herself. You buy one, because her eyes dare you not to. She ties the stems with a frayed ribbon and tucks them into your coat. "There now," she says, mock proud. You look practically royal. As you walk on, the faint scent of the flowers mingles with the sharper odour of tallow smoke and horse dung. This is London perfume, the scent of survival. At the corner of Whitechapel High Street, you duck into a narrow doorway where the air changes. Inside is a coffee stall, little more than a cart with a canvas roof, and a tin lamp. Steam rises from a battered pot, and the man behind it nods. Hot cup. Penny a pour, he says. You nod back, hands grateful for the warmth. He pours the coffee, thick and bitter as midnight. You been to the market? He asks. You nod again. Busy night, he mutters. Always is when the river's low. Folks dig up more than mud, if you know what I mean. He doesn't elaborate, and you don't ask. In London, some truths are best left unspoken. He gestures toward the edge of the stall, where two boys huddle under a shared blanket, steam from their breath catching the light. Street lads, he says. Used to call him crawlers back in my day. Still do, some places. Sleep by the fire till I pack up, then move on. You remember them, from the darker alleys and colder stories earlier in the night. Still here. Still surviving. You hand the man a coin for another coffee. He nods in thanks and mutters, better out here than the workhouse. There's an old debate. Historians still argue whether the workhouse was meant as mercy or punishment. Officially, it offered shelter and food. In practice, it often stripped away dignity. Families were split, possessions seized, and labour demanded. To many of London's poor, sleeping under a bridge was preferable to sleeping under the gaze of a clerk. You sip the coffee and feel it burn down to your chest. The stall owner, noticing your wince, chuckles. Aye, it's more tar than tea, but it keeps the chill from your bones. Behind you, the market hums louder now. A woman is shouting about potatoes, another about lace. Someone plays a tin whistle, just a few notes that slip through the fog like a half-remembered tune. You move on, deeper into the waking city. The streets begin to fill with night workers returning. Sweepers, porters, lamplighters. Their faces are tired, their movements slow but practiced. Some carry bread wrapped in paper, others just walk, silent and hollow-eyed. You turn down Flower and Dean Street, one of the East End's most infamous addresses. Here the buildings lean inward, as if conspiring. Lodging houses crowd each other, their windows blacked out with grime. The smell of damp and humanity hits you like a wall. You step through a doorway marked beds 3p. Meals extra. Inside, the air is thick with breath and mildew. A woman at the counter eyes you warily. You after a bed or a look? Just a look, you say, gently. She shrugs. Suit yourself. Don't touch nothing. The room beyond is a sea of bodies. Men, women, even children. All wrapped in whatever scraps of blanket they've found. The coffin beds, they're called. Narrow wooden boxes, side by side, stacked like drawers in a human cabinet. Some snore softly, some stare upward, eyes open but seeing nothing. In the corner, a small stove glows faintly, its flame almost apologetic. A man tends it, stirring a pot of something greyish. Soup, he says when he catches your glance. Mostly water, but warm. You sit on an empty bench, careful of the damp. The sound of quiet coughing fills the air, punctuated by the creak of shifting boards. For a moment, you realize how thin the line is, between being part of the city and being swallowed by it. A woman beside you begins to speak, voice low. Used to work in service, she says. Housemaid. Lost me place after the mistress took ill. No reference, no job, no room. She gestures around. You ask her name. Mary, she says simply. Don't matter which one. You want to ask more, but her eyes close mid-sentence. Exhaustion heavier than words. You leave a coin on the bench beside her before stepping back into the chill night. Outside, the fog has thinned. The market behind you has begun to fade too, stalls packing up, leftovers scraped into gutters. The city is rearranging itself again. Night people disappearing, day people emerging. You walk west, toward the river. The air grows sharper there, touched by salt and industry. Barges float past like ghosts. Dock workers shout, chains clatter, and you realize, this city never really sleeps. It just shifts which side of its face it shows. Along the embankment, a man is playing a violin, slow and sweet. His hat on the ground holds a few coins, some damp petals, and one button. The music follows you, threading through the fog until it's just another heartbeat of London. There's a strange beauty in this. The rhythm of poverty and persistence, of lives stitched together by tea steam and streetlight. You think back to the flower girl's violets, now crushed slightly in your coat pocket, still smelling faintly of hope. You turn down a final street, narrow and uneven, where the faint light of an alehouse spills across the cobbles. The sign above reads "The Honest Sailor," though it's safe to assume none inside fit the description. The door creaks as you enter. Warmth hits you. Smoke. Beer, laughter. Men crowd the bar, their hats low and their voices rough. A fiddler saws out a jig near the hearth, and two women dance, skirts swirling in the firelight. The bartender, a bald man with arms like barrels, grins when he sees your tired face. You look half drowned, friend. Pin'll fix that. You nod. The beer is flat, but it's warm, and the sound of laughter feels almost holy after the silence of the lodging house. You watch the faces around you, tough, lined, alive. Here, among the forgotten, there's still joy, still defiance. A sailor beside you raises his glass. To London, he shouts.
May she never sleep and never starve.
The room erupts in cheers. Someone slaps your back. Someone else starts a song, off key but full of life. You drink, and for a moment you feel it too, that stubborn pulse that refuses to fade, even in the darkest streets. Later, when you step outside again, dawn has fully broken. The fog glows gold, the sky pale and washed. You can smell bread baking somewhere, hear church bells ringing faintly in the distance. The city feels softer now, as if it too is catching its breath. And you walk on, the flower girl's violets in your pocket, the sound of laughter fading behind you. Morning settles, grey and cautious, over the eastern quarter of London. The air still carries last night's chill, but a thin sunlight presses through the fog like a reluctant promise. The river smells metallic, the cobblestones glisten from an earlier drizzle. You follow that metallic scent past warehouses and timber yards, down to the quieter edges of the city, the places where London begins to bury its memories. This is the realm of death's labourers, the men and women who work the trade that never sleeps. Here every sunrise finds a new body to claim. The city grows, the cemeteries swell to match. You find yourself at Boon Hill Fields, a resting ground for the nonconformists, the dissenters, the unlicensed, the poor. The headstones lean like tired teeth, inscriptions half erased by soot and time. A man in a brown coat is at work near the gate, scraping moss from a slab with the edge of a knife. Morning, he mutters without looking up. His accent is thick East End, vowels rough as coal dust. Bit early for company, ain't you? You tell him you're just walking, and he snorts. Aye, everyone walks. Till they don't. He gestures toward a cluster of fresh mounds. Business has been steady. His name is Mr. Copley, and he's a grave digger, or as he calls it, a soil man. He straightens, wiping his hands on a rag. You'd think it'd get easier. It don't. Not the diggin', nor the leavin'. He leads you along a row of stones, talking as he goes. Used to be just churchyards, see. But the cholera filled 'em faster than a pub on payday. Graves stacked like pastry layers, till the stench got so thick, even Parliament couldn't ignore it. That's your historical fact for this stretch. London's graveyards in the early 19th century were dangerously overcrowded. Before reforms, coffins were layered atop one another, and decomposition gases would sometimes bubble through the soil during rainstorms. The Burial Act of 1852 finally pushed the city to build garden cemeteries. Outside its core, like Kensal Green and Highgate, Copley spits into the mud. We called it the Great Stink of Souls. Folks like to talk about the one from the Thames, But trust me, the dead were louder. You glance toward a cart rumbling down the lane. It's covered in canvas, wheels squeaking. 2 men follow, heads bowed, coats threadbare. Copley nods to it. Undertakers, cheap ones. 4 shillings'll get you carried, but not much dignity with it. You walk beside him to a small shed where tools hang like skeleton limbs. Shovels, picks, a lantern, and a long wooden board with rope handles. The lift, he says, patting it, for lowering. You can't toss them in. Not decent. He sits on a crate, lighting a pipe. Some say it's bad luck to smoke here. But the dead don't seem to mind. And the living, well, they mind everything else. He gestures toward the edge of the yard, where a group of children in rags are watching curiously. Them. Runners. Wait till we go, then they root around for scraps. Buttons, bits of cloth, sometimes teeth. He exhales smoke, shaking his head. No blame. Hunger don't ask permission. That's your quirky fact. Tooth. Selling was a small but real trade. Poor scavengers sometimes pulled teeth from corpses to sell to dentists, who cleaned and reused them in dentures. The so-called Waterloo teeth came from battlefield dead, but London's graveyards had their own unspoken supply. You follow Copley deeper into the yard, where the soil grows soft and the air strangely quiet. This spot, he says, for them has had no name. Foundlings, beggars, the city's forgotten. We dig wide and low. No coffins. Just shrouds and mercy. You crouch by one of the mounds, noticing a small wooden cross tied together with string. No inscription. Only a violet tucked beside it, half crushed. You remember the flower girl's gift still in your coat pocket, and feel something twist inside you. Copley clears his throat. You'd be surprised who ends up here. A banker's maid. A poet no one read. A mother who ran out of coin for medicine. London eats fine men and foolish dreams alike. He turns back toward the gate, muttering, and me. I dig till it's my turn. As he leaves you to wander, the world seems to muffle itself. Footsteps dampened by earth, voices swallowed by the mist. The only sound is a faint hammering nearby. You follow it through the fog until you reach a coffin maker's workshop. Inside, sawdust floats like pollen in the air. A man stands bent over a plank, hammering nails into a small pine box. Child's size, he says without looking up. Hardest ones to finish, but the pay's the same. You ask how many he makes in a week. Too many, he says simply. And never enough. He sets down the hammer, rubbing his wrist. They want plain boxes for the poor, polish for the middling, and brass for the gentry. But it's all the same wood underneath. He points to the back wall, where a sign reads, "Funerals arranged, modest rates. Prompt collection." We don't ask too many questions, he adds. If they can't pay now, they'll pay later. Death's the only debt that collects itself. He offers you a seat on a stool and pours tea from a cracked pot. The air smells of oak, varnish, and loneliness. You ask if he's ever afraid, surrounded by so much death. He shrugs. You stop fearing what you understand. London's always been a graveyard pretending to be a city. Outside, the bells begin to ring. St. Dunstan's in the east, slow and deliberate. The coffin maker stands, listening. That'll be another service, he murmurs. Business never pauses, only changes hands. You step outside and follow the sound toward the churchyard, where a small crowd has gathered. A funeral procession moves through the fog, 4 men carrying a coffin draped in black cloth, a priest murmuring prayers. Behind them, a young woman walks alone, face hidden beneath a veil. No carriages, no mourners, no flowers. Just her and the hollow rhythm of shoes on stone. You fall in step beside the bystanders. One whispers, another fever death. They're spreading again. Doctor says the air's bad near the docks. And there it is. The open scholarly debate that threads through Victorian London. Was disease born from miasma, foul air rising from rot, or from unseen germs carried between bodies. Even now, historians note how slow the shift was, from superstition to science, from incense to sanitation. The priest finishes, the coffin lowered. The woman steps forward, dropping a single coin into the grave. A custom Copley told you once. Payment for safe passage, a bribe for death's pheromone. Then she turns, face pale and resolute, and disappears into the fog. You linger. A robin lands on the fresh soil, tilting its head. Life, nosing around death's threshold. As you walk back toward the river, the sun has finally broken through the haze. Light spills over the headstones, soft and almost forgiving. You notice how the moss glitters in it, how the city's grime turns briefly golden. A barrow rolls past, piled high with wreaths of paper flowers. A boy pushes it, calling out, "Funeral blooms! 2 for a penny!" He grins as he passes, teeth chipped, voice bright. Even death, you realize, needs its marketing. You follow the street until it opens toward Highgate Cemetery. Newer and grander than Boone Hill, wrought iron gates, angels lifting marble trumpets to the sky. Here lies a different class of deady merchants, writers, and reformers, names etched in long-winded confidence. But between the monuments, you spot smaller markers, simpler stones. The contrast is startling. Retropore. You murmur to yourself, the earth charges the same rent. At the crest of the hill, you pause. The whole of London stretches below you. Smoke, spires, bridges, the curling ribbon of the Thames. From this distance, it looks peaceful, almost beautiful. You wonder how many of those rooftops hide another body cooling quietly, another family whispering prayers. The wind moves through the yews, and for a moment it sounds like sighing. You think of Copley of the coffin maker, of Mary from the lodging house, of Eliza at the printing press. All living, all moving, all precariously balanced above this great sleeping city of bones. And then you remember the joke Copley made earlier. Everyone walks till they don't. You smile despite yourself. The gallows humor of the working class. It's not callousness, but armor. A necessary laughter in a city that never stops measuring its worth in headstones. As you turn to leave, the robin sings again, the sound high and defiant. You take one last look at the graves below, the city beyond, and whisper to no one in particular. Rest easy. You don't notice the dawn this time, because what you're seeing is a different kind of light. It comes not from the gas lamps or morning sky, but from the flash of a reporter's magnesium flare. The street, the people, even the crawling figures in the mud are caught in an instant of brightness that burns white against the fog. When your vision clears, you realize someone's documenting them. The reformers and the journalists of Victorian London had arrived. They came armed not with shovels or soup ladles, but with notebooks and sketch pads. They believed that, by showing the respectable classes what truly happened in their city, they might stir hearts, or consciences, to act. You can almost hear one of them murmuring to a colleague, "We must show the world, or they'll never believe us." You glance at the man nearest the camera. His coat is worn but clean, and his pen scratches rapidly. He's a social investigator, one of the many who flooded the slums in the mid to late 19th century. Some were genuine reformers. Charles Booth, Henry Mayhew, or Florence Nightingale before she became a household name. Others were thrill seekers, the Victorian equivalent of poverty tourists, venturing into the East End like explorers charting a savage wilderness. You follow them into a damp alley, the smell of coal smoke mingling with rotting cabbage. The investigator's assistant holds a lantern low. They pause near a group of women sitting against the wall. Crawlers, again. Though this time you notice one clutching a child, whose face seems years older than it should. The journalist murmurs to his companion. She said her name's Mary. Sleeps here every night, eats when she can. His tone is careful, not cruel. but detached, as if observation alone might cleanse the discomfort. That's the strange paradox of this era. To reveal the truth, one often had to stage it. Many sketches and engravings published in newspapers were based on brief glances, hastily dramatized for middle-class readers. The Crawlers of St. Giles, the Ragged Children of Whitechapel, the Sisters of Misery. These became categories, almost characters, digestible for those safe in parlours warmed by coal and tea. Historians still argue whether these exposes helped or harmed their subjects. And yet, the pictures worked. People read. They gasped. They wrote letters. Queen Victoria herself received reports about the East End's poverty after the sensational Jack the Ripper murders of 1888. Philanthropic committees sprouted overnight. The cry of "something must be done" rippled through drawing rooms. Though, of course, what should be done, and for whom, remained a matter of fierce debate. You pass a print shop where men are setting type for a morning broadsheet. A bold headline shouts from the window, "The abueses afliandiaulief, second jesines from est." You smirk softly. That word, abyss, is everywhere now. Reformers like Booth mapped poverty as if it were geography, colouring whole neighbourhoods in grim shades of red and black. Here, one map would say, live the vicious, the criminal, and the semi-criminal. The categories were tidy, almost scientific. But life never is. Inside you find a boy sorting stacks of penny papers. He tells you they sell best when there's misery on the front page. Folk like to read about what they've escaped. He shrugs. There's that Victorian double standard. Charity mixed with voyeurism. Fascination with filth paired with moral disgust. It's the same energy that made slum tours popular among curious aristocrats, who'd hire a guide and wander the rookeries at night, clutching handkerchiefs to their noses, whispering, "Good Lord," as though poverty were theatre. You turn a corner and stumble upon one of those very tours. The reformer in front, tall hat, silver-topped cane, gestures toward a cellar where half a dozen families sleep on straw. "Observe," he says gravely, "the degradation that idleness breeds." The guide doesn't notice the mothers stirring, or the man who hides his face from their gaze. You bite your tongue. If irony were smoke, this whole street would choke. Still, not all observers were blind. Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor gave voice. Real, unfiltered voice. To the very people others pitied. You hear echoes of his interviews in your mind, a watercress girl describing her daily earnings, a costermonger explaining the price of onions, a mudlark speaking of turning the river for treasure. Mayhew didn't just write about them. He let them speak. That was revolutionary. Historians still argue whether he exaggerated, but few doubt his empathy. Farther along, another reformer you might recognize, Charles Booth, has pinned a massive city map to a wall. He traces each street with a fingertip. Here, the respectable poor, he murmurs, and here, the vicious semi-criminal. You wonder whether the people in those very streets would agree with their assigned colours. It's a curious thing, how compassion and control often travel together. At the same time, artists like Gustave Doré sketched haunting visions of London, a pilgrimage. His images of endless slums, with huddled mothers and spectral children, circulated through Europe. They were meant to shock, and they did. But they also fixed poverty into aesthetic form. Misery became a tableau. Beauty, perversely, emerged from suffering. You find yourself uneasy at how easily horror turns picturesque. You overhear two reformers bickering on a doorstep. "We must rehabilitate them," says one. "Teach discipline, thrift, morality." The other sighs, or perhaps just feed them. Their argument mirrors Parliament's own debates. The Poor Law of 1834 had intended to deter idleness by making workhouses unpleasant, but by the 1880s, critics called them barbaric. Meanwhile, private charities competed to offer moral uplift, often judging worthiness more than need. You drift toward a mission hall, where a preacher shouts about redemption. Inside, tired faces stare up as he promises that faith can lift them from filth. You notice one woman's eyes close, not from conversion, but from exhaustion. The preacher's words wash over her like rain on stone. When he finishes, tea and bread are handed out. The reformers tally names, record ages, nod with self-satisfaction. Outside, a photographer poses a group of ragged children by a wall. "Hold still," he says, "look solemn." The flash goes off. The image will be sold as a stereograph card to viewers who enjoy a safe thrill. You can almost predict the caption street Arabs of London. The children giggle after the shot, snatching crumbs from the photographer's assistant. But you wonder whether they'll ever see themselves as the world now sees them. And that's the quiet truth. The poor became visible, but not necessarily seen. Their images traveled faster than their voices. By the century's end, the reformers had created an archive of empathy, maps, reports, and photographs that documented everything and solved little. Still, these documents endure, and from them, modern historians rebuild the texture of Victorian street life, the crawling bodies, the glowing lamps, the ceaseless struggle for breath and bread. You walk past an editorial office, overhearing editors debating tomorrow's headline. One insists on "th broken city," another argues, "too bleak. Make it a ray of hope in Whitechapel." You laugh under your breath. Marketing hasn't changed much in a century and a half. As night falls again, you find yourself wondering, who watched the watchers? Reformers were shaped by their time, steeped in evangelical duty, fascinated by improvement, terrified of moral decay. Yet without them, so much of this world would have vanished without trace. Their imperfect gaze preserved what the powerful wished to ignore. In a final alley, you see a faint chalk mark on the wall, initials of some forgotten investigator, perhaps, or a tally of deaths. The lamplight trembles across it like a ghost's hand. You reach out, tracing the rough letters, thinking how every reformer, reporter, and artist left their mark. Sometimes out of pity, sometimes pride, often both. Then you hear the scrape of boots behind you. A figure, coat collar up, hat low, steps out from the fog. He carries no notebook, no camera, just eyes, observing you as you've observed them all night. For a moment, you realize the irony. You, too, are one of the watchers. And in that realization, London exhales again. An enormous, wary, living thing. The reformers will keep writing, the presses will keep rolling, and the crawlers will still crawl, illuminated briefly by the flash before fading back into shadow. The watchers always think they're capturing truth. But truth, like fog, resists being held. The city doesn't sleep. It exhales. You sense it the way you feel the tide retreating slow, soft, inevitable. The fog hangs pale and milk, colored over the rooftops as dawn pushes gently at the edges of the night. A thin drizzle paints the cobblestones, and for the first time in hours, the streets are nearly empty. Nearly. You walk through the fading hush, the gas lamps dimming one by one. The glow turns from gold to grey, then disappears entirely as daylight begins its quiet takeover. The scavengers, the buskers, the crawlers, everyone you've met through these long, winding hours, have folded back into the city's bloodstream. They vanish into doorways, attics, cellars, and beds of straw. The night's performance is over, and the stagehands of survival recede behind the curtain. Near a coffee stall, a few costermongers are already setting up. You smell roasted beans and damp burlap, the small mercies of warmth. The vendor pours steaming cups for men who've worked through the night, hands trembling slightly as they pass coins back and forth. The clink of copper feels like punctuation to an exhausted sentence. You see one of the crawlers, a woman you recognize from the alleys near Covent Garden, hunched beneath a shawl. She sits on a step, eyes half shut, the faintest smile flickering as sunlight touches her face. For her, this is morning. Maybe she'll sleep now, while the rest of London hurries off to work. You wonder how many mornings she's seen without a roof or a reason to rise, and still, somehow, she endures. That's the quiet heroism here, not in grand reform or noble rescue, but in endurance. In the act of simply staying alive one more day. A church bell rings faintly across the rooftops. Pigeons scatter from the eaves, fluttering like pages torn from a forgotten story. You follow the sound toward the river, your boots splashing through puddles that shimmer with a thin film of light. The Thames smells the same: iron, salt, waste, life. It's low tide again, and you spot a few figures already picking along the edge. Mudlarks, their silhouettes dark against the water bending. Searching, always searching. The river gives, and the river takes. You remember what the Toshas said, that everything eventually finds its way here, even secrets. You wonder what this city would look like if its memories could rise to the surface. Every scrap of laughter, pain, hunger, hope, floating together like driftwood. In the distance, the city's engines begin their mechanical hum. Carriages roll, shutters open, bakers stoke fires. You realize the pattern now: London renews itself every morning, not through mercy, but through momentum. The poor will wake into the same streets, the same hunger, but also the same stubborn pulse of life that refuses to die. Historians still argue whether the 19th century changed these lives for better or worse. Did reform bring relief, or just regulation? Did industrial progress lift, or crush the people beneath it? No answer ever fits. The truth lies somewhere in the fog, in those liminal spaces where light meets shadow. You pause at a bridge, resting your elbows on cold stone. Below, barges drift like sleeping whales. Across the river, factory chimneys breathe slow trails of smoke into the sky. You could almost mistake them for clouds if you didn't know better. You think of the reformers' maps, of the colored lines dividing respectable from vicious. How absurd that seems now, when you can see how seamlessly one blends into the other, how even the neatest drawing dissolves under real weather. You smile, remembering the street sweepers, the buskers, the mothers, the boys who vanished into chimneys and came out blackened but alive. They were never categories, they were people, and they remain so, even when history tries to tidy them up. The drizzle thickens into steady rain. You pull your coat tighter, though there's comfort in it. Rain has a way of cleaning even what can't be saved. It slicks the cobblestones and washes the chalk drawings from the walls. The reformers' chalk, the children's chalk. It all runs together in pale rivulets down into the gutters. Maybe that's as it should be. The scent of baking bread drifts from a shop nearby. You follow it half dreaming, and find a small boy delivering loaves. He nods politely, barefoot but proud. His grin could light the whole street. You realize that even in a city defined by struggle, joy insists on returning. Thin but indestructible, like grass between stones. As you walk farther, the street widens, and the light grows warmer. For the first time in hours, you hear laughter, real laughter, from somewhere above. A window opens, and a young woman shakes out a rug. Dust floats like snow in the golden air. Below her, a cat stretches on the stoop, unconcerned by anything except its own sunbeam. The city has survived another night, and so have you. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of the past settling back into silence. The clatter of carts, the call of the costermongers, the shuffle of bare feet. They all fade into the soft percussion of rain. London resumes its endless rhythm. And maybe that's the secret behind all its stories: the poor, the reformers, the dreamers, the forgotten. They're all part of one breath. The city inhales its people, and when it exhales, it reshapes them into memory. You take one last look down the empty lane. The puddles reflect not faces now, But sky, pale blue, hesitant, but clear. You think, maybe the city's not cruel, just enormous. Maybe kindness gets lost in the noise. But it's still there, like a match in the fog. So you keep walking, listening to your own footsteps fade, feeling the world slow to a hum. The rain, the river, the breath of the city, they all merge into one steady lullaby. And as the last of the gaslights flicker out, the story folds itself neatly into stillness. The day begins. And you, finally, let go. Word count 270 AFE, wind down 300 words, and now, breathe slowly. Let the noise of the city drift to the edge of your thoughts. Picture the cobblestones softening beneath mist, the sound of distant hooves fading into quiet drizzle. The air cools, the sky stretches pale over chimneys, and you're standing at the edge of a London that no longer exists. Only the rhythm remains. Every sound that once rattled these streets, the cries of vendors, the clink of coins, the shuffling of the crawlers, has turned to a whisper. You can almost hear it merging with your own heartbeat, steady, calm, unhurried. Let that heartbeat become your guide. Inhale the faint scent of rain on stone. Exhale the weight of everything the city showed you. The stories of the poor, the forgotten, the dreamers. They're not meant to haunt you, only to remind you how deeply human persistence runs. The fog clears now, slow and patient. You watch it lift from the river, revealing still water, quiet and forgiving. The gaslights fade, one by one, until only dawn's soft light remains. A promise that no matter how grim the night, morning always finds its way back. Your shoulders ease. Your breathing slows. The city sleeps inside you now, peaceful and still. So, close your eyes. Let the hum of distant carriages fade. Let London's heartbeat blend with your own. And as the last light settles gently across the rooftops, know this: every era ends, but the endurance of people, their small courage, their quiet hope, never fades. Sweet dreams, traveller of fog and time.